Alright, so I'm back and I'm here to talk to you about the Holdovers. So The Holdovers is a new film by Alexander Payne, which I am a big fan of his previous films, Sideways and The Descendants. Downsizing, not much so, but he's a great writer and a great auteur, so I was really looking forward to see The Holdovers after seeing, first of all, the trailers, but also seeing the reaction to it. And after seeing it, I can honestly say it's one of my favorite films of the year. I love how it takes the scary idea of being alone at Christmas and the solitude that comes with it, and kind of turns it into an uplifting comedy drama with stellar performances all around. I honestly adore the whole film. It has like kind of like a vintage look to it just from the opening logos. Honestly, it's one of the best written films of the year, and I was equally surprised by the sharp sense of humor and its honest sensibilities. This movie has a lot of art thanks to its characters. Joy Randolph was absolutely fantastic as Marie. She's basically at the art of this movie with obviously Paul Giamatti's characters, and it really put me right into the Christmas spirit. I saw it a couple of weeks ago, and it just dropped on digital, so I wanted to talk about it. And one of his biggest strength is how it can be equally hilarious and heartfelt at times with fascinating three-dimensional characters. The way you can laugh out loud.
You just earned yourself a detention, sir. Now get back here.
Being here with you is already one big fucking detention.
Son of a bitch, that's another detention.
And a few seconds later, you're just like really moved by what's going on screen with the writing. I think what I really love about it is that there's a certain melancholy to the film, but it's also very poetic. You can tell from the first few shots, whether it's the establishing shots for the characters or the outdoor shots, just creating the atmosphere with the snow. You just, for example, if we take Paul Giamatti's characters, his establishing shots are very revealing of his character. Someone who doesn't take care of himself and he's alone, isolated, which is a main theme in the film. And it's also, to go back on the writing, it's extremely hilarious how his character uses his extensive vocabulary to insult people. There's a few examples I just absolutely love. You hormonal vulgarian, you genuine troglodyte.
A genuine troglodyte.
Jesus.
You snarling Visigoth. He always find a way to insult his students, like trying to use his vocabulary, but it's a way to elevate himself because you can tell that he's dealing with personal issues about his own confidence, and it's also why he's hiding in that school. He's not hiding in a school, but I don't want to say too much. All right. From now on, we're going to talk a little bit spoiler. So if you haven't seen the movie, go watch the film. It's absolutely fantastic. So I'm going to go a little bit deeper into some of the subject in it. But one part that I also love is you can tell that the two main characters, whether it's Paul or Marie, they're drowning their own sadness into alcohol, and they're projecting. A lot of characters are projecting their own frustration onto other people. Whether it's some fight, Angus is having some fight with students.
I never want you home again. The only tool in your room is you.
Paul has some tendencies to just snap and start like screaming at his students, and he just he's inflicting them like this very hard studies right before school. Clearly you can tell he's having a lot of fun with his authority there, while you can tell that he's not very happy where his life is at the moment. And it's funny because you've reminded me a lot of the Grinch. He's afraid of the world, and whether it's with his lack of interest in Christmas, his loneliness, but it's also the way what he treat people. He smells, he's selfish, he have like kind of this disgusting personality, but you can tell there's a heart in there, and that's kind of where the movie shifts toward that solitude and liberation. What's interesting is the first act of the movie is more about the solitude and the isolation, and then towards the middle of the movie there's kind of a shift towards the liberation. So a bunch of those students, they leave. There's a helicopter that comes get them, and it leaves, and there's just this shot when you can tell the frustration on both Angus and Paul for completely different reason, because you can tell that Angus, he wants to go out, but Paul, he can't, he wants to be alone. Now he's stuck with this kid, and he wants to read his mystery novel. So that's kind of like funny in a way, and that's the whole spirit of the film. You can kind of like laugh at those characters, because it always reminds you that they have some art, even though like it's not always they're not perfect. All of those characters are imperfect in some ways, but you kind of learn to love them throughout the movie, and that's thanks to the writing. It's very lyrical, it's very rich.
I can tell by your faces that many of you are shocked at the outcome. I, on the other hand, am not, because I have had the misfortune of teaching you this semester.
Like I was telling about the insults, but it's just the dialogue. There's a very great rhythm to the dialogue and the execution. And when they're dealing with the solitude, I love those little moments. For example, when Angus is stealing the keys and he's just wandering about the school at night. And it's those little moments that kind of like conquer your art and make you fall for those characters, even though they're imperfect. And once again, I was talking about the liberation. There's another scene where Paul is chasing Angus through the school, and he literally takes a look at the camera and at us as the audience, and he smiles, and from that moment on you can see that the relationship changes. But from that point they start working on their own personality, and you can tell that they're start having a good time. And in a way, the whole movie, it's about moving on and stop holding on to something that doesn't make you happy. And you can tell that with the use of cross dissolve. So this is a technique that's usually used to show a certain passage of time or to move from one scene to another. But in that movie, I loved how it's being used to reflect certain mood changes with our characters. It's also used to change from one scene to another, but you can also tell that there's a lot of cross dissolves in that movie, and it's kind of put that emphasis on the passage of time and moving on. So I thought that was an excellent use of a technique, and just to bring that into the storytelling. There's another way also in the first act. You can tell that the camera is very stationary. So just like the main protagonist for most of the film, there's very few traveling shots, handheld shots. The camera is very stable. When it moves, it's either like a crash zoom or a pan, but the camera itself, it doesn't really move. But when they go in Boston, you can tell that there's a lot more dolly shots and camera movements. Once again, maybe reading too much into it, but there's a certain use of those camera movements throughout the film that kind of like reflects the whole move and their whole evolution as characters. And another example also, I love the scene where Paul meets his old classmates from Harvard, and he kind of like lies to him in front of Angus, even though it's supposed to be against his principles. So you can tell like he has those issues with that. But just making the sacrifice by the end to leave Barton to kind of like justify his existence, it liberates him from this prison that the school was for him. So by the end of it, I think it's a great ending to all of those characters. So it has that, like I said, of course there's a sadness in the movie and a certain melancholy, but there's also that part of it that kind of feels like uplifting, and it's all about like breaking the leash and moving on. And you can tell that through the writing and the different filmmaking techniques. So yeah, The Holdovers, one of the best films of the years. Check it out.
Welcome back, snarling Visigoths.